If you see one in the sky, if you see one manifest before your very eyes, if you see a strange creature lurking outside, then tell it on accounts of the paranormal. Hear it on accounts of the paranormal. Welcome to accounts of the paranormal.
Welcome to the show. Tonight I am pleased to bring you author Michael Oka, who is here to discuss the paranormal activities at his childhood home that changed his life, inspired his book, The West Grand Haunting, and ignited his curiosity and ultimate investigation into the paranormal. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
Happy to have you here. This is a kind of a special interview for me, touching on your book, because it happens to be set in actually my hometown, the city I was born and raised in, Corona, California. And recently, when I found that out, I wanted to do this interview even more so. But that's very exciting. And I'll add that we didn't know each other until going through this, talking about the podcast. So I just want to make that clear. But it just happens to be from my hometown.
Yeah, absolute coincidence.
With that, let's get into it, if you don't mind. When you guys first moved into this house, like the early life, when you moved in, what age were you, and what was your initial feeling when you got into the house? What did you feel, and when did things change?
Well, no, that's interesting. Like, you're kind of familiar with the story. I don't know if you got a chance to read the book or anything, but basically we had just come out of the mid 1980s, and it was my parents were separated for a bit, and we were hopeful, is what way they would say. We moved in this place. It didn't feel like anything at first. It was hope. We moved in. It was the first time we were back together as a family, and we walked in, and it was a quiet house. It was a pretty house. It was big. It was an enormous property, bigger than anything we'd ever lived on. At the time, the backyard had like 3 orange trees, a pomegranate plant, swing set. It was a nice property, garage, and a root cellar. And for a very short period of time, it was just kind of inert. Is the best way I could say. Like, not a presence. You walk into a place and you're like, oh, I can feel the history. It wasn't any of that either. It was empty for quite a while. My sister and I, we moved in. My mom and dad, and we had stored a lot of our toys from the mid 1980s. G.I. Joe and the Cobra base, all that stuff was down in the root cellar. So we'd go down there to play with our old toys. And I was about, let's see, we moved in the house in October of 89. I want to say it's like October 4th of 1989. I'd have to double check, but we would go down and play in the root cellar. And then one day, Mom and Dad are like, hey, don't go down there. Well, why? It's not safe. Well, how? You let us. We just don't want you going down there. No real explanation. One day, because we would get home from school, and my mom was working the swing shift, and we came home from school, and my mom's like, hey, stay inside. Your dad will be home in about 10 minutes. So we're like, okay. And we had this dog, Stormy, that I'd had since I was about 6 years old, around 5 or 6 years old, that we had gotten while we were living in Lawndale. And his name was Stormy, and he was a good boy. He's real protective. My sister and I, we're not allowed in the root cellar without an adult. And technically, in dog years, Stormy's old enough. So we rationalized it. And she's 2 years younger than me, so she would have been 6 while I was 9. She'd be 6 or 7 at this time. And we went into the root cellar to go play. And we were down there for about maybe 15, 20 minutes. And we heard footsteps on the floorboards above us. And it wasn't like, the house is settling. The house was built, and turns out, years later I discovered the house was built in 1910. It had plenty of time to settle. But we heard these. They sounded like deliberate footsteps, and they're going from the kitchen. To understand the floor plan of the house. The backyard had the driveway and the garage, and we never used the front door because it was out by the front street. And as we know, anyone from Corona knows, West Grand's a busy street, and right over by the 91 freeway, there were no stoplights, frequent car accidents. So we went in through the back. And we thought, oh no, we're in trouble because you come in through the backyard, you go up the stairs, there's the kitchen, Next door to the kitchen's the living room. Next door to that's the den. To the right, you've got a hallway. At the end of the hallway, mom and dad's room, a restroom, my room, and at the other end of the hallway, my sister's room. And we hear these footsteps from under the house, and we're like, oh no, dad's home. And just for any listeners you have, it was the 80s, late 80s, but still the 80s, and spanking was a thing. And my dad he could be liberal with a belt if you got out of line. And so we're like, oh
I
no.
hear that.
Yeah, spare the rod, man. And so like we're kind of panicking, and I'm like, okay, we can still find a way out of this. And here's the thing though, is like the root cellar had this heavy door. As a kid I always likened it to like a medieval dungeon door. It was made with 4x4s and crossbarred with 2x4s, and there were the thick heavy bolts on the outside. It really looked like a dungeon door. And that was wide open. My dog Stormy's whining and curling around my feet. And he's a black lab. He's about, oh gosh, 85, so 4 or 5 years old. He's curling around my feet and whining. And I wasn't a dumb kid. I knew, my dad wasn't home because I didn't hear his van pull in. He had a minivan, one of the boxy kinds from the late 80s, early 90s, ugly gray thing. And I would have heard it coming in, but I didn't. But I would rather, at this point, I'm thinking, I'd rather get the punishment, because if I can lie my way out of that, it'd be better than the alternative. Because if he's not home and there's footsteps upstairs, that means someone's either in my home, or worse, no one's in my home and there's footsteps upstairs. And so me and my sister we're thinking, okay, we can get out of this, and we're running up the root cellar ramp. There were no stairs, just a dirt ramp that went under the house, and we're shutting the door, slide latch in place, running up the stairs, going inside, and of course, when you're scared, you try and lie to yourself that something isn't what it is. And first thing I'm doing is like, hello, dad, and of course nothing, and no one answers back. No footsteps. We do a room by room, and there's no one in there. And not even 5 minutes later, dad arrives home, and our mouths are shut. It's one of those things. You're a kid. You want to tell someone that what just happened, but if you do, you are, admitting liability on yourself, and that's a spanking. So you say nothing. That was as I put it in my book. That was when the house woke up. It had been dormant for a little while, and then one day it was not anymore. And that was when the atmosphere of the house actually got kind of thick.
About how long did that take?
Oh gosh, I don't remember the exact amount of time. We moved in early October, and I want to say the first instances started, within maybe 1 in 3 weeks. I would have to consult my notes on it because I was 9, and I had to go through a lot of memory notes and some old photos to kind of get an idea of where things started. A history of the house, like as far as me figuring out when I moved in, I had to pull up a previous owner and renter list, and I was able to see when my mom and dad actually moved in there, which was around, I want to say, either October 4th or October 6th of '89, and it wasn't past the mid mark of the month. The house started pretty quickly.
And didn't waste much time. And I love how you, in the
No.
book, you have a diagram, the illustration, the floor plan of the house. That's really cool.
That is the actual floor plan of the house. A lot of it's based on memory. So, like some of the dimensions, the restroom, if you see the floor plan, the restroom looks like a big skinny alleyway. It, in fact, was a big skinny alleyway. The toilet was immediately next to the bathtub, like, a leg's length away from the wall, and a leg's width away from the wall, and a leg's width away from the tub. It was a really skinny, weird bathroom. Master bedroom was big. My room was small. My sister's room was big, which, since I know you've read the book now, her and I ended up trading rooms. But it was a weird layout. But overall, the dimensions of the house are exactly as you see it in the diagram.
You had mentioned that your mom was the one that told you to not go down in the cellar. Was it her?
It was her specifically. Yeah, she was like, "Hey, you and your sister, we don't want you to go down there anymore." The reality of the matter was, I said my parents said, but the reality was my mom.
Did she say why, by chance?
She did not. She seemed we're not too perceptive as kids, and yet at the same time, they tell you kids pick up on everything. And she didn't say much, and I don't want to say she seemed shaken. It was more like she seemed nervous. No one was really telling us anything about anything, because if you're a responsible parent, you don't tell your kids, "Hey, we had a really scary experience in the basement. Don't go down there." You hide that kind of thing from your kids, and if your kids are disobedient twerps like we were, then we go down there anyway. Because when you say, "Hey, don't go down there," it makes it far more enticing. Lose lose for mom and dad.
For sure.
After that, things started getting, like I said, the atmosphere seemed thick and it was tense. And in the book I use, that the house hated us. As a 9-year-old, I if I had understood what that feeling was, I would have said the same. I knew that it was tense, and there was like a kind of a feeling of being unwelcome in your own home. On one side, you're living in this brand new place, but on the other side, you constantly feel like you've got eyes on you every time you turn around. The worst places in the house that you could possibly be, beside the root cellar, would be like the kitchen, which was directly above the root cellar. Uh, my sister's room, which was directly above the root cellar, my room, which was directly above the root cellar, um, and every now and then, like the den, which was just next door to in the picture you can see it, but to describe it, it was right next door to the living room, and it was separated by these half walls. It was real pretty. And all we had in there was like a spinach green, classic late '80s IBM computer. No real furniture in there, an armchair. And that room actually wasn't so bad as the living room was sometimes. The bathroom was actually kind of scary sometimes, which was weird. You wouldn't think, I'm going to the bathroom and then I'm afraid to be in the bathroom. But we didn't hear anything, at first, like ambient whispers, like in a horror movie. It was more like just a constant feeling of unease. And, we had to do our homework in the kitchen, and I'd be terrified. I'd be sitting at the table, and we had these 6 windows. They look like little half windows at the very top of the wall, and they faced out toward the backyard. And you sit there, and you always feel like something's looking through those windows. And to give you an idea, those windows were most of them, all but one of them, was pretty high up off the ground, so it was really irrational. And as a kid, like I said, no one was telling me anything. I'd be doing my homework in the kitchen, and I'd just get real uncomfortable. I'd tell my dad I was scared, and he'd say I have no reason to be, and I'd do my homework. Thought I was trying to get out of my homework, and I'll do it in the living room. No, you'll be distracted, and I'd sit and suffer through it. It started out like that. It started out kind of, small things. It didn't really hit critical mass for me until and I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's most people I ever talk to refer to it as that episode, and it was that episode of Unsolved Mysteries with the haunted Titanic. And
Oh, I remember the Queen Mary, right?
I'm sorry, haunted Queen Mary Titanic.
Loved that show back then, and I remember that episode actually very well. I've seen it probably a few times in reruns.
Everybody I talked to remembered that. One of my readers actually, I won't use any foul language, but he sent me a personal message he was reading, and he was like, "Hey, by the way, F you." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Dude, I remember that episode. I was sleeping in my parents' bed for a week." And so, I mean, I actually just rewatched it before I wrote the book too, and it's creepy, but it wasn't scary as an adult as it was when I was a kid. But that was neither here nor there. I wasn't really supposed to be up anyway, and I was never supposed to watch anything before I went to bed because, as my mom noted to my dad often, my mind has a tendency to take things to dark places, which is a weird thing to say about your kid when you're a parent. But went to bed, and, the rule was, we would leave the door half open, and we weren't a family that slept with the lights on. We were raised, if you think you saw it, you didn't see it, it's your imagination. Which, if we get a chance to backtrack in a bit, that turns out to be just a family tradition of, nope, that didn't happen. So I'm in bed, and as a kid, I was diagnosed with, well, at the time it was called ADD. We didn't have the HD to add to it yet. It was just ADD, but I couldn't sleep without background noise. I had to have something to keep my mind busy so I can go to sleep instead of thinking. And they got me this old AM FM radio, and it had the knob on it and the dial, just like the classic radios. It wasn't digital in any sense of the word. And my dad put on a baseball station because, well, even as an adult, I kind of found listening to baseball on the radio to be pretty boring. And so I'm laying there in bed, and I'm about to doze off, and station starts getting scrambled. Now, this is going to be the first major incident that occurs. The station starts getting scrambled, and then there's a different radio station on. and then it's scrambled, and then it's Mexican radio, and then it's scrambled, and then it's a different station, and it's like something like talk radio, and then it's scrambled again, and I'm like, what? It's kind of jolts me out of sleep because I'm like, why is this happening? And I remember very clearly, I was on the bottom bunk of my bunk bed, and I did not want to look at anything, if I'm being honest. And it was another one of those situations where you start lying to yourself. I'm like, no, this isn't happening. I'm not going to look, but it's not happening. And then I edged toward my bed and I leaned over onto my stomach and I put my left hand on the floor halfway out of bed, and I'm moving the dial back to where I know the baseball is. And I heard / detected movement, kind of out of my peripheral vision. And I'm like, no, 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 no. And when you're a kid, you have two really interesting factors that go on about you. You're incredibly afraid of everything and like absurdly brave. You're willing to look at things that most people probably wouldn't want to. And so I looked up toward the motion, and there was a shape. My door's halfway open, and behind the door there is a shape, and it's a solid shape. It's not like translucent, spooky Scooby stuff. It was a legitimate solid shape, and it looked like, someone was sitting on the floor with like an old serape or a woven blanket over them. And I immediately went into like survival mode. I'm like, hey, you're stupid. I'm going to tell mom and dad, you shouldn't be behind my door. Go back to your room. You're being stupid. You're stupid. And I knew it wasn't my sister. I wanted it to be my sister. I desperately wanted that to be my sister, because if it wasn't my sister, then it was what I suspected it was. And, I'm wide awake now. And I'm got the shakes because what I know now is an adrenaline response to fear. And it didn't do anything at first, but then it moved, and then it looked up, and I was looking at like what looked like an old lady sitting in the corner wrapped in a blanket, having it over her head. She was a desiccated semi-corpse, I guess. No, nothing in the eyeballs, or the eyes should be, just hollow caverns. It was like looking into the face of a skull that had skin on it. Um, as a kid, I always tried to draw it, but basically lips drawn back because they were tight and dead, and just bare teeth and no gums where gums should be. And I screamed a very, very shrill scream. I freaked out, panicked, and about the time that I was screaming and panicking, my mom had just arrived home from work. And so she's rushing in, the hall lights are on, my dad's in there, I'm screaming, the woman behind the door, the woman behind the door. My mom's freaking out. What's going on? Is, dad's dumb enough to admit that he let me stay up and watch something with him, and now my parents are arguing again, and the only thing I'm screaming is the woman behind the door. And then, the next thing I know, I'm sleeping in my parents' bedroom. And that's the first major incident that actually occurred in the house. And the weirdest thing, is my sister just slept through it all.
That is straight out of a horror movie, I'm just going to add. I can't even imagine being a 9-year-old, 10-year-old boy and seeing something like that.
Had just turned 9 earlier that year. It was something that I could not have made up, because things like that, I had never seen anything like that yet in my life. Not in horror movies or books or anything. It was unfathomable as my adult self looking back. I sometimes like, oh, maybe I just, maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a shadow, but shadows aren't solid. They're not 3-dimensional. And that was the first thing that I noticed as a kid, is that it didn't do what ghost stories said ghosts did. You always hear about them. You could see through them, or they're half of like a body that's hovering there. And this thing was solid as me or you, and it was physically there, and then it wasn't.
Did you see it disappear? Did it disappear in front of you?
No, that was the thing. So no, around the time I started screaming, right, I had rolled onto my back and I was screaming for help. And then by the time, I looked in that direction again, my mom was opening the door. It was gone. I should say, it was preceded by a pretty foul smell. Around the time that I was getting ready to look in that direction, the room was stinky, and not like boy stinky or locker room stinky, like rotting stinky, and they always tell you things, phantom smells. And that was one of the worst experiences. I actually, up until I finally wrote this definitive version, because this novel that I wrote that you read is like the 6th or 7th incarnation of my attempt to write it, and being unable to write it successfully. And I would, every now and then, you have those nightmares, and there it is again, except in the nightmares, I'm not a kid, I'm an adult, but it's still equally as terrifying. And after I wrote it, mercifully those kind of bad dreams have stopped. But looking back on it, man, there's no rational explanation for what I saw. It was just that something in that house understood something fundamental about what scared us, individually, almost, I would say. Some things like what would later happen with my sister in her room. Um, it would be one thing for her, but like things that my mom experienced or that my dad never admitted to experiencing, but would later tell me about, his next wife in line. Spoiler alert, the parents get divorced. That his, girlfriend at the time experienced. They were all individually different experiences, wildly. What people smelled in the air, wildly different. What people heard or felt as far as the tension, all completely different things.
Did you tell your parents what you saw right after you saw it?
Oh yeah, no, they heard me screaming about the woman behind the door, so they asked me what I saw, and I told them, and that seemed to worry them pretty good. Didn't change my sleeping arrangements, not for a while though.
I'm actually looking at the diagram of the house. It's like a rectangle shape. Which room
It
was
is.
your room? The middle room on the left side?
Yeah, so just after the bathroom, the first room on the left was my room.
Yes, like if you're laying in the bed that's against the wall and you're looking, you can see clearly behind the door. I understand it now.
Yeah. So if the door's open 45 degrees, half
Mm-hmm.
open, I'm looking behind the door and there she is. From that point forward now, we sleep with the hall light on. And mom and dad, who usually sleep with their door open, now sleep with it a crack open so they can respond if they hear us crying for any reason. And the only rule, though, which I mean, I don't know if it was better or worse for me. The only rule now, though, is that because the whole light's on and it's too bright we had for some reason 60-watt bulbs, but because it's so bright, we have to have the door closed 3/4 of the way so that the light's not shining in my eyes and keeping me awake. But it helped. I slept a little better after that. I made it a point to never look over even on that side of the room after that. Once that happened, when I got in bed, man, my eyes were up or they were facing the other way. I wouldn't face the door again.
Did they just brush the story off? Tell you you're imagining things?
My mom, God bless her, insisted to me that it was a nightmare. And I knew it wasn't, and I told her it wasn't, but she insisted that it was, it was just a very real bad dream, honey, things like that. I think she believed me. I wouldn't know that she had some inkling of even like moderately believing me until I was later in my adult life. But she did what a good parent should do, which would be, lie to your kids and say, hey, you imagine that didn't happen, because the alternative is that did happen and now we can't live here anymore and we don't have anywhere to go. We're just starting over in Corona. We had just come out of a bad thing, and our last place of residence as a family was in Lawndale, California on Freeman Avenue. It had been, oh gosh, 87 when they split up the first time. So almost 2 full years between, when they first split up and when we'd be a family again. And I don't think anybody was in the market for looking for a new place to live, especially over something that as an adult you would write off. Maybe, just like kids lie to themselves, as an adult, it's just a bad dream, or he's got a dark imagination. It must be it. And she kind of brushed it under the carpet.
Did that help you? Did you actually question yourself once she told you that? Or did you just still, even at that young age, you knew what you saw?
I knew what I saw. I knew I wasn't asleep. It's being hyperactive with ADHD or ADD as a kid before the HD would have been invented. Being somebody that's hyper aware and hyper alert of everything that goes on, from the slightest noise distracts you, and it draws your attention. If I had been sleeping, that would have been fine. But if I had been sleeping, I wouldn't have felt the carpet under my hands or the exertion of having to actually reach over, because I didn't want to get out of bed, because what if there was something under the bed? Because the house is scary, because the house is now always scary. There's always tension. You always feel like you're being watched. So naturally, you're not going to get out of bed in the dark of your room, for what could be under your bed. And it's worse because, it wasn't. And so I know what I saw, and I didn't believe her. I chose to be in that state of denial, like, oh, maybe it was a dream. But there was never a point where I was convinced that I was dreaming or that I had imagined it. I don't know that I had the capacity to imagine something so grotesque.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the image right now, and it's wicked. I can't even imagine being a kid and seeing this. It's just insane.
Well, you know what's messed up about that, right? I've been trying to illustrate that thing since I was a kid. And when I saw that picture, I realized that is about as close as I could get to the reality of what it actually looked like. And it still pales in comparison. You know, what you're looking at just looks like a horror movie creature that you would see in maybe like a certain Hollywood horror feature. What I saw was so much worse than what I could provide by illustration, because it wasn't just fine lines. It was a smell, but it was also physically visible. It was, you're watching sinews, stretch and turn when it moves, and its jaw working, the muscles in its jaw working. And even though it's staring at you with these cavernous eyes where eyes should be, there's no eyes there, and it wasn't like looking at a movie magic horror feature, even a practical effect. It was like looking at an actual living corpse, bundled up in the corner of your room. And even as a kid, I'm sitting there and I'm like, why would it look like that? Even as a ghost, why would it look like that? And I couldn't really wrap my head around it because, we hear like, my family, we're people of faith. I'm Christian. And we have a specific belief on exactly what ghosts are. But back then, my mom was just newly baptized. Dad's a Catholic. And anything that we'd ever heard about ghosts was that, it's the ghost is going to look like the person who died. Not after they died and rotted in the grave. It's supposed to look like the person. So why would it look like that? And as a kid, I didn't have the life experience or functional experience even to say, maybe it wanted to look like that, or maybe that was intentional because the sole purpose was to do something malicious to me. Which in my adult life, I think that was the goal, the end goal, because it spent our entire time living there, going out of its way to create fear and tension in the family.
Oh no, this thing showing itself to anybody, the intent has to be to scare the living crap out of you.
Right? Because why else would it appear in that way? It only looked human in so much that, like, it had a face. It had where eyes would have been, part of a nose where a nose would have been, and it was humanoid. But it wasn't what I would define as as an adult or a child, as something that was human at any given point. And that was the thing about it is, the next thing to happen in the house, I wouldn't hear about until I'm probably in my mid-20s, maybe late 20s, when I'm having lunch with my mom at a Denny's. The next thing that happened that I was aware, because for me, the rest of the nothing happened again for a while. The house was always still the same nerve-wracking place to be. It was so much tension in there. And it wasn't just the tension from mom and dad fighting. That was part of it. But I think mom and dad were actually fighting also because of the house. Because now, we're in a place and we have to admit one of two things is either there's something wrong here, or we have to say that that nothing's wrong here and it's all of our collective imagination. And the fighting between mom and dad. Dad had vices, so those had roots in the arguments themselves too. But the next thing that happens, things kind of settle down for a little bit. And then the next thing I remember is I'm going to sleep, and just, you get to that point in elementary school, right? Everybody goes through Bloody Mary. And that came up in my sister's class, and she didn't play it. We were always told that those games like that are devil games, and we're not supposed to play those. So we're not in the mirror calling out Bloody Mary and holding a candle up like some daring kids. We weren't remotely that brave. We weren't even brave enough to chicken out. Even the possible chance, especially after the things that we were feeling and experiencing, it never got to that point. But one night, my sister's screaming. It has to be after 9:30, 10 p.m. Mom and dad are both home, so I have to presume it's a Saturday or a Sunday, something like that, because they're both home and no one's at work. And lights already on in the hallway, their door's already open, and they're running into my sister's room, and I hear her screaming, the Bloody Mary, and her closet door's open. Now, I didn't witness this myself. But like I told you, when I experienced the woman behind the door, it didn't even wake my sister up. Of the two of us, she's a far better sleeper. And so she's screaming the Bloody Mary, and I get up out of bed and I go in the room and she's just bawling, inconsolable, absolutely inconsolable. My mom or dad, hey, go back to bed. And I notice that her closet door is open. Now, to open that closet door, to give you an idea of how it works, it requires actual effort. It doesn't just, slide on open on its own. And it wasn't office access. There wasn't anything wrong with how it was constructed. 10 out of 10 times you close it, it stays shut. She didn't sleepwalk and open it and then run back in bed and scream. It wasn't her nature because she wasn't really genuinely aware of what was going on. And I had been forbidden to tell her about the woman behind the door. So it comes, she's telling them what happened. She's asleep in bed and she hears rattling on her closet door. And when she wakes up and she looks over there, the door opens and this thing comes out. And you ask, like I said, I'm 9, so she's 8. She's probably about 7 now. You ask a 7-year-old what that thing is, and she can't describe it to you. It is what I imagine a 7-year-old would imagine whatever Bloody Mary is supposed to be. She just said it was gonna get her. And that one really upset my mom and dad. That one, especially my mom. And again, that's because, she too had experienced something. We ended up having to trade rooms, my sister and I. The way they rationalized it is, whatever my sister had experienced, my parents insisted that she also had a bad dream. But she had a bad dream in her room, and I had a bad dream in my room. So if we switched rooms, those bad dreams would be kind of null and void. Which, at the time as a kid, I'm like, yeah, okay, made sense to me. We did switch rooms, and not a peep, nothing really big happening going on, and strange things did start happening that I didn't notice as a 9-year-old. I had a little black and white TV that I'd had since I was like 3. And it was in my room, and it was so that, background noise and stuff. But we were in there watching The Simpsons in black and white, and my sister would intentionally fall asleep in my room. And this went on. She would either intentionally fall asleep in my room, or she would sneak into my parents' room and sleep under their bed. But she would fall asleep in my room, and this went all the way on into the new year. By Thanksgiving, we thought the worst had passed. No more nightmares. House was still tense, but it seemed to have calmed down and nothing was going on. We made it into December. My grandparents got us a Nintendo. That was awesome. And things seemed like they were all going to be just okay. And then it was kind of inert again for a bit. It was sometime in the summer, though, that my parent announced they were going to get a divorce. And mom moved out with me and my sister, and we went and got this apartment on the other side of town. And custody battle was ugly, but we were spending until it was all figured out, the court had mandated, we'd do week on, week off. And one of my dad's weeks, I was there, and gosh, we were in the living room watching TV. And we're in 1990 now, man. Hey, it's the 90s. Welcome to the new decade. Let's figure out who we are. So everything seemed pretty much like it was a season for change. Parents are divorced. That's change. I'm going into 5th grade. There's some change. It was something new for me. And I'm in the living room watching TV with my dad and my sister. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up. I had fallen asleep, and I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up. And it's that thing that I hate doing as a kid, and sometimes even as an adult, if I'm honest, but especially as a kid, I wake up and I'm looking around the house and it's quiet, man. And I don't just mean like quiet, like, stillness. It was more like it was the absence of sound, and I called out, "Hello, Dad." And my sister's name. And not only was there no answer, but like there was no ambience. There was no my voice, echoing down the hall or out of the bathroom or any of the open doors or the kitchen. It was just like speaking into a soundproof room. And I got this overwhelming sense that I was being watched, but more like gaze instinct. And I mentioned that in the book, that gut feeling that you're being watched. And I get into a little more detail. They seem kind of silly, but it really is a thing, man. Your gut has over 80 million neurons in it, more than a cat's brain. And they tell you to trust your gut because your brain and your gut communicate. And my gut told me as a kid, hey, you're being hunted. Like I freaked out. The TV was off. The only light that was on was in the living room. And so I'm rushing into the kitchen and I'm calling my mom and I'm crying my eyes out. And honey, there's nothing in that house. You're fine. You're safe. And I had never actually said there was anything in the house. When she's saying there's nothing in the house, I was bawling because I was afraid. I didn't tell her why I was afraid, but there's nothing in the house. I'm sure they just went out to go get something, and literally within just a few minutes of being on the phone while mom's calming me down, my dad and my sister come back in. And it's weird, they came in through the front door instead of the kitchen door, and they've got Taco Bell, and my dad's like, "Who are you on the phone with?" And the next thing you know, he's getting chewed out by my mom. And you get, she was being loud because, I'm away from the phone now and he's on it. John, how could you leave him in that house? You can't leave him alone in that house. And in things like that, you're a kid, and I don't think I was meant to hear that, but like, why can't he leave me alone in the house? And I already knew why, but also, why is she saying it if the house has nothing in it? That's my last genuinely, truly, truly terrifying experience in the place. The house after that, it was always really, really intense. But my dad always trying to be, more of a friend than a father. We were talking about the house, and I was told him talking about the woman behind the door, and my sister's talking about the Bloody Mary, and we're in his van, and it's his week again, and he's got a new girlfriend, and I can't say her actual name, but I think in the book I call her Darlene or something like that. And she was a real sweet lady, mostly. Said some stupid things that put a rift between my sister and her, but my dad's driving us to go pick her up, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, well, Darlene saw a ghost," which is like, your kids have just confessed they're terrified of your house, and you're like, "Hey, by the way, my girlfriend saw a ghost in our house." Good job. So we ask her, and Darlene's going on about, she smelled gardenias. She had smelled gardenias in the house, which we didn't have any in the neighborhood. And she was walking into my dad's bedroom, and there was a woman sitting on what used to be my mom's side of the bed. And the woman wasn't moving. She didn't look at her suddenly or do anything. She was there. And just as quickly as Darlene blinked, she was gone. Smell lingered for a little while longer and then faded away as well.
Did Stormy ever show any strange behavior? Did it ever stare like into a corner and bark or do anything unusual?
So about Stormy, going back to Stormy, my wonderful publisher, Madhouse Books, on behalf of Mrs. Ashley Pell. Originally in the book, there was actually what the book says, this is going to be mostly true, but there is going to be some, creative nonfiction involved. And there had originally been in a chapter in there where we would see things from Stormy's perspective. Now, we can never know what an animal thinks. But, I've been writing for a while, and I tried to get inside the head of this situation because Stormy did behave in ways he would never behave. And we get into this chapter that ended up having to be erased for the sake of space and to keep people from getting pulled out of the story. You get the setting, well, animals don't know day or night. It's one long continuous stream of time. It's either dark out or it's light out, but it's not day or night. There is no such thing as hours. And the only thing that you know is your family. And that was describing Stormy to a T. He was the dumbest freaking Labrador I've ever seen in my life. But one thing that could be said of him more than anything else is he would attack and fight to the death anybody that ever threatened our family. And while he was my dog, he was really my dad's dog, in so much that he would kowtow to my dad if my dad's voice got harsh. And I told you in the root cellar, Stormy had whined and curled around my feet. He wasn't allowed to come in the house. He wasn't well potty trained, so we didn't want him doing that. But there was an instance where my dad came out of the garage and we were kind of roughhousing, and Stormy almost attacked him, which my dad, in Stormy's early life, had spanked him a couple of times, not with a belly, with his hand, but Stormy was afraid of my dad and would never have raised his hackles at him. Stormy got in between us, raised his hackles, snarling, spitting, drooling, barking kind of thing. I'm glad my dad didn't get mad. John had a very short fuse, and on his best days, he had a difficulty keeping his temper. But Dad must have seen how I looked. He's like, no, he's just trying to protect you. He doesn't know we're playing. Now, as a side note, my dad had once told me that he never experienced anything while simultaneously getting goose flesh up his arms and his hair standing on end. I think he always lied to me about it, but also I think just because of how vulnerable my dad was as a human being, how angry he was, how much difficulty he had controlling his emotions, I think he was also unusually susceptible to whatever was going on in that house.
I was going to ask about your parents, if they ever expressed any experiences that they might have had in the house after the fact, like when you were older.
They did. My dad, when I was about 17 or 16. Well, so when I was 16, my dad and I made up. We had a horrible fight after he'd moved out of the house. He moved in with his girlfriend. We had an enormous fight where I thought, like, as a 10-year-old at the time, I thought we were going to like throw down. Like, I thought I was going to get into a fist fight with my dad as, a kid. It didn't happen. But we remained estranged until I was about, oh gosh, halfway through being 15 or 16. I can't remember exactly for sure, but he called up one day and we made up. And we stayed in contact, but he lived outside of the country by now. He was over in Indonesia. And he would come by about once or twice a year, and time went fast. And so around the time I was 17, we were living in Baywood Apartments, phase 2, best phase ever. And my buddy Alan and I, we were he was going to take us out. We were going to go around town, get some fast food. He could meet my friends. I wanted my friend to meet my dad, who I'd spent so long being angry at this man. And I wasn't really mad at him. I was just mad that he hadn't tried harder, like that he hadn't done better to try and keep his family. And when I got past all that, he was just my dad again. And so, I'm got to be newly 17 and he's meeting my friends. We're going out. And on the way, he had to drop by my aunt's where he was staying. God rest her soul. He had to go pick something up. And on the way there, I asked him, I said, can you tell me what actually happened at the house? And it got like thick silent in the car. And he's like, he looked down at his arm and I looked and every hair on both of his arms standing on end, goose flesh all the way up to his shoulders. And he's like, oh man, I haven't thought about that place in a long time. And I'm like, well, we had some really bad experiences there. And you told us what Darlene said about what she saw. And he's like, yeah, I didn't really see anything. He said, but the place he says, I'd be lying if I didn't say it wasn't hard living there. And I said, well, it was just because of mom. He says, no, it was just, there was something, kind of made me uneasy about the whole place. And that was all he was willing to say. And he left. And my buddy Alan, you'll hear me call them my brothers. We've known each other for over 20, some of us 30 years. My brother Alan's like, hey, I think he's hiding something, dude. And I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, did you see his arms? I said, yeah. He's like, yeah, he dummied up pretty quick. I'm like, yeah, but he didn't want to talk about it after that. So I had to let it go. And John wasn't big about talking about things that bothered him. He was a barrier. He had a tendency, kind of like I did when I was young. You hold things inside till you can't hold them inside. And that was part of, his temper issues, which actually got dramatically better as he got older. But he didn't want to talk about it. He was not comfortable with the topic of it. And I don't know if it was just because of the house or the bad memories associated with it, but he made just that one comment, Darlene was the only one who saw anything. The place made me uneasy. And then he dummied up and that was it. And to this day, he passed in 1997, same year, unfortunately. The late summer of that year, he would pass. And if he knew anything or he had a story to tell, he took that to the grave, man.
Did you ever find out or look into the history of the house?
So funny you should ask that. I did. While I was in the middle of writing this thing, it dawned on me I should look into the history of the house. We were told when we rented it, the manager at the time, it was an American craftsman home built in 1910. He was wrong. It was built in 1916, but what 6 years, It was an older house, part of the historical district in Corona, California. That whole West Grand Circuit, the whole Grand Circuit is just a beautiful drive of probably some of the creepiest houses in all of Corona, California. They're beautiful. They're American craftsmen. They're Victorian or neo-Victorian. Some of them have kind of a neo-Gothic architecture going on, and they're just beautiful homes, and a lot of them have a lot of secrets in them walls. And this one undoubtedly had no secrets, but unfortunately, or had some secrets rather, but unfortunately, when I looked up the history of the house, it stopped. Like the history of owners, from what I could find for like paying like $15 to get, a property's history, the list of owners stopped in like 1980 something, and I couldn't get anything farther back. And I know the house had been lived in. It was turns out years later I would find out the house had a very negative reputation in the neighborhood. A lot of bad things had happened there. Sometimes bad people had lived there, and nobody really knew anything about its exact history, the origin of the first owners, what happened, why they sold it, if they lived or died in the house. Nobody knew. There were a couple strange architectural fixtures. House had a chimney on it, but there was no fireplace. But in the living room, there was a hutch that had been built into the wall, a china cabinet, and had been built into the wall and bolted into the wall, and they had used caulking around it. I mean, we always presumed that that was the fireplace behind the hutch. We couldn't tell. It was awful thick between the hutch, the wall, and the kitchen. If there was a place that chimney went, it was definitely behind the hutch. So the house had secrets. We just didn't know what they were. And in my adult life, attempting to find out what they were, I couldn't pull anything up. I couldn't find the original blueprints of the house and any of the records I paid for. The only thing that I could say with absolute certainty is that it's an American craftsman style home built in 1916. The other one, my mom. You asked if she had ever had an experience. She told me later. I did mention earlier on the Denny's ordeal. We were at a I want to say it was a Denny's restaurant. It was a diner, and I was talking to her. He says, "Well, she said I had an experience, and it was one that would change how things happened for her in the house until the day her and my dad split up. And it was she came home from one night, and the Grand Circuit, especially near the 91 freeway on ramp over there. We get a lot of trucks coming through there. There were a few times we thought we were having an earthquake, but it was just a 16-wheeler rolling past us going to the freeway or coming off the freeway. But one night she gets home from work, and it's about 10:30, maybe closer to 11, and she's telling me this story. She comes in, kitchen lights on, goes in the living room, turns on the living room light, turns off the kitchen light, pops a squat on the couch, turns on some Nick at Night. She's watching the old black and whites. Back then, it was like My Three Sons, Mr. Ed, Green Acres, in that order. And she's just kind of flipping through it and then checking out other channels on the cable television, and she hears the blinds move. Now, the one cool thing when a 16-wheeler passes by is you hear it. They got that Mack truck engine going on, and she's sitting in there, and the blinds kind of shift, and she ignores it. And so she just kind of ignores it, flipping through the channel, and then the blinds shake again, and she says something along the lines of, "Oh, bullshit, prove it." And then the blinds are shaking violently, but only those blinds, not the blinds in the den, not the blinds in the kitchen, just those blinds. And then kind of like they were horizontal blinds, if someone had taken a finger and just kind of xylophoned it all the way down. And by that point, she's screaming and panicking. "John, wake up, go search the house. Something's in the house." From that point forward, anytime she came home from work, she came in through the kitchen, she opened the door, and Stormy was the first person to go in the house. Well, first one to go in the house. He was a dog, but he'd come through the house, and on occasion, she'd get mad at him. She'd tell me he'd come in sometimes, and he would stop at that hallway. And one time he stopped, and he started cowering and rolled onto his back and started pawing at empty space and whining. Other times he would kind of go down into a dog loaf, and put his snout on the ground and stare up into the hallway and, "Stormy, bad dog, bad, stop it. You're being bad, Stormy," because she's past the point of lying to herself at this, point. And my mom, she'll say now she doesn't believe in ghosts. She does believe in demons and negative energy, and whatever was in the house, as far as she's concerned, was probably one or both. But the way that the dog reacted was subservient, if not terrified of whatever it would. And he always only stopped in the hallway. It was that one lingering spot where we heard the footsteps stop the very first time when the house woke up while me and my sister were in the root cellar. Footsteps from the kitchen into the hallway, just like that. And it was always the hallway where Stormy would stop and cower or whine or paw at the air and roll his belly over, belly up, neck bare.
And looking back now, are your thoughts about the house in line with your mom's? What do you feel you saw and experienced?
My personal belief, I would go along the line with my faith that it was something demonic. Had it just been, your friendly neighborhood Casper, it wouldn't be a corpsed, eyeless woman behind a door or a Bloody Mary or something whose sole purpose seemed to want to sow discord and discontent and unhappiness and absolute fear. It radiated from the walls. It was always watching you through the windows. It was always everywhere in the house. And if I ever get a chance to talk to you again, I could share my sister's story and just some of the other things that, led into my practice of paranormal investigation, because it was that house that set me on the path, which would be a lifelong curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear about that. And let's touch on the paranormal research and development that you ultimately got into.
Well, and that does stem actually from us later in my 20s. Dad's dead already. Every now and then on the way to or from work, or if I was taking a shortcut, I'd pass the house. And one day I was with my brother Mike Guess. I'm like, hey, you want to see where I grew up? And he's like, yeah. I said, okay. It was a creepy place, dude. And we drove up, and he pulled into the driveway right nearby where my dad used to park, by the garage. And there just happened to be this Hispanic woman out there, and she comes walking out. She said, can I help you? And I'm like, oh, I was just showing a buddy of mine, where I used to live. And she looks at me and she goes, oh, and I said, sorry, I didn't mean to bother you or spook you. And she says, well, no. Did anything weird ever used to happen? And that's an entire monologue of a story, and I don't know that you've got time for it. But the events after that led to us going over to my brother Alan. His dad owned a Foster's Freeze, and we all would meet up there at random times. And just as we were speeding literally into the parking lot, kind of in a panicked state, my brother Alan and his girlfriend at the time, they came speeding in. And we're all sitting there talking crossways to one another. You can't believe the weirdest shit that just happened. And almost in unison, not necessarily verbatim the exact phrase, but talking over each other about the weird and inauspicious events that occurred. And it just so happened to be, that those occurrences happened. That specific day was October. I want to say it was October 27th, 2001. When we formed at the time it was the PRD. The name changed after that. We were a bunch of amateurs trying to figure out how it worked, but we did form our paranormal research and development team. And the goal was not to rely on things that could not be proven. It's all well and good with the tools of the trade that a lot of paranormal investigators use, but also none of those things can be repeated as a matter of fact. It's a lot of it is very much a subjective experience. And if you have to prove it subjectively, have you really proven it? And that was our ground hypothesis for how we were going to approach it. And it would, over the years, over a couple decades, I guess, because I'm 45 now, it would evolve, but I imagine that will probably have to wait. That was when we started our paranormal investigation group.
We'll have to have you back where you can touch on that, the group, and any investigations you've done or what you have found out since then, and even touch on that little tail end of the story of the house where we talked to that lady. I would love to hear about that as well. But Michael, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. Love the book, The West Grand Haunting, published through Madhouse Books. If you want to tell people how they can get their hands on this awesome book or get in touch with you, if that's something you're interested in, go ahead.
Madhouse Books published this bad boy. It's available on any major online retailers: Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get a hold of me. I have the author Mike Oka page on Facebook. Currently working on a different unrelated non-paranormal project, but anybody who wants to talk to me or ask questions, I'm always happy to share ideas and things like that regarding the paranormal. It is a fascination of mine that's followed me since my childhood. So yeah, whatever, if you like the book, shoot me a line. If you want to get the book or ask about it, shoot me a line. I always answer, just not necessarily the same minute, but I'm always there within 24 hours to answer your question.
Awesome. Thank you again, Michael. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh, glad to be on. It was an honor.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate you being here. You can catch this show wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, accountsoftheparanormal.com, where you can access full episodes, as well as links to all our socials and our YouTube channel, where you can listen and watch along with visual images. And if you're a fan of what you heard here, please like, share, follow, subscribe. I appreciate the support. And if you have an account to share and you'd like to be on the show, email me at show@accountsoftheparanormal.com and tell me what you saw. I'll see you next time.